Okay, I hope we're ready to go. My apologies since we're late. We had to update the firmware on this, so we're going to plug right into things. And okay, from last week, we're going to do lightning speed because I have about an hour and a half of stuff to do in 50 minutes. There was a question last week, Jane, about why the third temple wasn't rebuilt. And so I thought I'd give you just a real brief answer to that, which is not so brief, but the bottom line is keep in mind that there were two temples and they were the center of worship as well as the national identity. King David captured Jerusalem in 1010, roughly 1010, before the Common Era, or BC, and moved the Ark of the Covenant there. This joined the religious and as well as the monarchy together, and became a central unified point. The first temple was constructed by Solomon and completed in 957 BCE. Keep in mind, BCE is the same as BC. Keep in mind, these dates keep descending because we're going towards the year 0, and so that's why. So it was actually David's son Solomon that completed the first temple. Nebuchadnezzar came in, removed the temple treasures, and by 587, 586, depending on what resource you read, totally destroyed the structure. So there goes the first temple. Then that was followed by the deportation of the Jews to Babylonia, and many saw that as kind of the fulfillment of some prophecies that they had not been a faithful people, and therefore it awakened interest in religious beliefs and in creation again, or the reestablishment of an independent Jewish state. Cyrus II, founder of the Achaemenid dynasty of Persia, conquered Babylon, allowed the Jews to return and to rebuild the temple. And so the work was completed in 516 or 515, again, depending on what source you're looking at. During the Roman conquest, and there's a lot that happens in between there, by the way, Jerusalem changes hands multiple times. But by 63 BCE, Pompey has entered the Holy of Holies, but he leaves the temple intact, okay, the one that had been built. 554 BCE, Crassus, who is the emperor, or one of three in the triumphant emperor group, plunders the temple treasury because they don't pay their tribute. So he decides he's going to take it himself. Then the second temple is cleansed and rebuilt and begun by our dear friend Herod the Great, who you've heard about in relationship to the nativity of Jesus Christ. He's king from 37 BCE to 4 CE, Common Era, and that rebuilding began 20 years before BCE and lasted for 46 years. And that's a picture of the assumed view of the temple. Rebellion against Rome began in 66, Common Era, ended with the temple's destruction on the 9th or 10th day of Av, which is the 11th month of the Jewish calendar, and their Jewish calendar is different than ours. And it includes, I think, about 29 or 30 days each month, and then every once in a while they had a 13th month. But the bottom line is, by 70 Common Era, the temple is destroyed. So now the question becomes, why isn't it built after 70? Well, all that remained of it was on the Temple Mount was the western wall, which is now called the Wailing Wall. It continues to be the focus of Jewish aspirations and pilgrimages. Beautiful pilgrim take a pilgrimage to that wall, the Wailing Wall. So in 691 CE, the Muslims build the Dome of the Rock, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they retain control of it. Now, in between 70 CE and 691, again, that property changes hands multiple times between what we call Christian nations, Jewish nations, Islam, back and forth. And so during that time, there's no chance to rebuild something at that point. But at 691, the Muslims build their mosque. And the mosque is built on the site where supposedly Muhammad came to Jerusalem, ascended to heaven, talked with God, so that made it a very holy site. Okay, so the site is returned to Jewish control in 1967. So of course, what we would expect them to do: demolish the mosque and build the temple again. Well, they don't. An Islamic Waqf controls the Temple Mount even to this day. What happened is the Prime Minister, Levi Eshkol, returned the Temple Mount to the Islamic Waqf as a gesture of peace and said, no harm whatsoever shall come to the places sacred to all religions. And when he says sacred to all religions, he's not talking about just Jewish and Christian and Muslim, but there are other religions that have used that site as a holy site. So there's your answer.
All right.
The mosque stands in that place. There are other, there's what is this? I can't think of it. It's something of the Holy Sepulchre, which was built on part of the temple lot by Christians and Jews, or by Christians, to celebrate Jesus' presence on that site. But this is the main item on that temple lot. Okay.
I'm just curious, who has been to Jerusalem? You've been to Jerusalem?
I have friends who have.
Nobody. We need a trip.
Catherine's son.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to go.
What year was the mosque built?
67.
691. Yeah, 691. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
So,
Catherine's son took a tour over there.
okay. So anyhow, now let's get to today's lesson.
All right. Thank you.
Here's the overview. Gospel of Mark details 3 conflict stories between Jesus and the ruling parties. Who are the ruling parties? Romans, but in this case, primarily Sanhedrin, Pharisees, Sadducees, etc. Those 3 arguments are over the baptism of John, whether it's divine or whether it's merely a human exercise. The parable of the vineyard, which I'm not going to cover because they're going to be covered next week in detail, in wonderful detail.
You're zooming a lot there, Don.
It will be meticulously covered in wonderful detail. And the third one is the dispute over Caesar's coin. And there are disputes even to this day about what that means. The author says it's a question concerning political authority. So here's the first of the divisions. This is John the Baptist, by the way. This is not Jesus. Sorry.
He's kind of scruffy.
And it's probably a little lighter skinned than in actuality. And I invited my British friend to come and read this to you.
They arrived again in Jerusalem. And while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests and the teachers of the law and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you authority to do this?" Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or from men? Tell me." They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say from heaven," he will ask, "then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men," they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things."
He can read that so much more effectively than I can.
That's awesome.
I rely on my British friend.
I like him.
So,
I don't know.
okay, the authors state, in these episodes, Jesus repudiates both partners of the Judeo-Roman colonial partnership in Palestine. What does that mean? What's the Judeo-Roman colonial partnership?
Well, if the Judean authorities
Mhm.
cooperate with Rome, then they can do what they want within limits.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So it's the Sanhedrin. It's those Jewish leaders who are cooperating with Rome in order to maintain the Roman Pax peace, and that's what they're referring to. And again, the authors are saying Jesus repudiates both partners. So let's take a look further. When faced with the entrapment strategies of hostile leaders, Jesus refuses to react defensively. Instead, he counters with a question to show the power of interrogatory theology, to lay bare the real intentions of his opponents. So what does that mean? What is interrogatory theology?
Well, it's a legal term.
Yeah. And
Questions?
All we
it
know
means-
is written questions is what it is in our world.
Same root as the word interrogate.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what's the sense of that? They're trying to entrap him, and what does Jesus do?
He just turns it around on them with his
Yeah.
own question.
Yeah, he questions them in return rather than giving an answer. It's typically what parents do when the kid says, "Can I have an ice cream?" You say, "Well, it's time for us to go play," whatever. Come up with some alternative. For discussion, when the chief priests, teachers of the law, and the elders ask why he has done these things in the temple, it's a clear reference to what? Remember in the scripture it says, they're asking why he can do these things in the temple.
He healed the guy, for one,
Okay,
and he preached in the temple.
okay. Now preaching in the temple didn't cause an uproar, at least earlier.
He cleansed the temple by going after the money changers and the
Exactly.
pigeon sellers.
Exactly. He's chasing away the money changers from the temple because there's this idea that it has to be certain money that is used, or certain pigeons, or certain sacrifices, and therefore it has to be pure, and therefore you have to exchange it for something acceptable to the high priest. Does that make sense? Okay. The authors speculate that the Judean authorities cannot eulogize the murdered prophet John because they have opposed him and no doubt consented to his imprisonment. Neither, however, can they publicly denounce him because of his enormous popularity, which no doubt skyrocketed after his martyrdom. So that's what the authors are saying. You agree? Is there another
They were
reason?
kind of stuck.
They were, okay, they're stuck between the rock and Jesus, right? Okay. Everybody agree? Okay. So if you were a Pharisee questioning Jesus, what would you do? Lawyer, you want to respond?
Am I a good Pharisee or a bad Pharisee?
You are just a Pharisee.
Is
I'm
there
going
a
to
good
be very
Pharisee?
arrogant, yeah.
Well, there was.
You are Saul before you become Paul.
That's what I'm thinking. I'm not going to
Well,
be handling it well.
Robert of Arimathea.
Oh.
So,
Yeah, wasn't he a Pharisee?
I believe he was. I mean, here's a little side note. I've read many commentators who say that Jesus was more akin to the Pharisees than he was Sadducees and others. And they question why this antagonism to the Pharisees. And they speculate that it's a later addition because later on it was the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Sanhedrin that was opposing the way of Jesus the Christ. So anyhow, go ahead, Pharisee.
How am I handling the situation?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go research why I'm right and he's wrong.
And come back the next day?
Yeah.
Okay. It's hard to imagine another
That's what
alternative.
good lawyers do.
Yeah.
We don't spout off if we don't know the answer.
Probably.
Yes,
you
I would,
want-
I would probably say, well, I
I
don't
would
know.
assume they carried his questions with more questions. I mean, they were attorneys and probably were very good at asking questions. I mean, sometimes that's all you can do. If you've ever seen show, the comedy show, Whose Line Is It Anyway? They have a bit that they do where they have to respond to each other only with
Questions? Yeah, that's awesome.
I was going to say, isn't that kind of what the midrash is?
Midrash?
The
A midrash, that's the
yeah,
Jewish.
midrash.
Okay.
Yeah, they all write their commentary, and then other people write commentaries to their commentaries, and
So
kind of still goes on today.
He didn't want to say that, but because,
Yeah.
because they're Jewish authorities, you probably assume that there were more questions.
So none of you would have said back to Jesus, well, why is the baptism of John relevant? You haven't answered our question.
Never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
That's because John was doing it on authority of God, and Jesus basically was too, and that's why it was relevant, because if they wouldn't admit that, then Jesus won't say, because they just attack him for saying that.
Yeah, the answer would be bad no matter what the question they ask.
So it's probably best if they just walked away, right?
Oh, yeah.
In German, there's a word, doch. And it basically means,
Oh, sort of like duh. Sort of like today's duh.
It just means I'm contradicting you, which is awesome.
So do you use that in court?
But it was my
I
favorite
didn't
word
say it
in
again
Germany.
because I want to use that with my wife.
Doch.
Doch. Okay. I'll try that with Joanne this afternoon.
Okay.
Okay. I'm looking for your 21st century response. Jesus refuses to become a defendant on their terms. Instead, he relentlessly prosecutes the assumptions of those in power. In this, Jesus is a model for all those who commit civil disobedience as a positive political act, breaking the laws of the state in order to question their moral underpinnings. So we have some emotionally charged words in there like civil disobedience and breaking the laws of the state. So what's your 21st century opinion or response to that?
He was making good trouble.
Good trouble. There you go.
Okay. And are we called to make good trouble?
I think we are. So.
I have been.
Yeah, I haven't either, but maybe I could in Florida these days.
Yeah. Well, we're going to be challenged further in this lesson if we have enough time to get that far. So we'll move along. And so here we go to our second reading by our friend, the British narrator. And this is Tiberius, who is the emperor at the time of this event.
Later they sent some Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, "Teacher, we know you are a man of integrity, for you aren't swayed by men because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we?" But Jesus knew their hypocrisy. "Why are you trying to trap me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin, and he asked them, "Whose portrait is this, and whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him.
I love him.
He needs to read all of our scriptures.
He does a nice job.
Expect Harry Potter to jump out in any minute.
Render
The
under Caesar.
denarius, sometimes called a tribute penny, is on the upper right-hand corner there, and you can see it does include a picture of Tiberius on the left. There's also a tetradrachm, which is on the lower right, and the left-hand part of that, or one side of it, is Augustus, who was the stepfather of Tiberius. And by the time Tiberius came into power, Augustus was dead and was called the divine, son of God, or the divine God. And so you can see at least there'd be some kind of a problem with either of them having an inscription, because you got to go back to the Mosaic Law. What did it say about graven images? So you have these coins, Roman coins, with Tiberius or Augustus and Tiberius on them. The authors state this text about the Roman coin has been the long-standing object of misinterpretation by those who impose two-kingdom theology doctrines upon it. What does that mean? What's a two-kingdom theology?
Well, one would be God's kingdom.
Okay.
The other one would be the earthly authorities,
Okay.
the political.
Okay. So two-kingdom theology would mean what?
I know.
Go ahead.
Okay. One was the Jewish community, and the other was the emperor, the Caesar. The emperor was the god, and you're supposed to worship the emperor.
Okay. But what does it mean by, what does this say back here? It says, whose inscription is on this coin? And Jesus says, give back to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's. What does that mean to you?
Well, to me, it means, I think it's come to mean that we live our public life in a more secular manner, and our religious life, we divide our lives.
Okay.
And we do that today because we pay taxes to the federal and state governments.
Yep.
And we pay our tithing to the church.
Right.
So their system was similar. You pay your taxes to Caesar, and you also pay to the Jewish leaders your what's due for your tithing.
Okay. Now, keep in mind, the authors are saying that's a misinterpretation by those who impose two-kingdom theological doctrines upon it.
Well, I think it talks about keeping our lives separate.
Okay. And
we aren't supposed to show our religious side and the secular.
So the misinterpretation is that we keep our religious and our secular lives separate.
That's the way I see it.
I believe that my entire life, and it seems like the author of these books always throw a monkey wrench in long-held beliefs that says so in the Bible, and they kind of throw a monkey wrench into stuff a little bit.
Well, there are some other religions who believe that your life, it's a whole. You don't separate your religious life from your public life. Like some of the indigenous religions around the world, some of the Hindu and Indian religions, it's kind of like a holistic kind of life, what I would say.
But back then, in Jewish life, everything was integrated.
Yeah.
Economics, politics, and religion. You didn't separate them.
Yeah.
How about early restorationists? Wasn't the church doctrine that we combined that there is no secular life, there's simply a spiritual life, and they both are, we should be responding similarly in all situations? But I mean, it's not that different than what they do. Excuse me. The issue is not one of compatibility. I'm continuing to read what the authors said. The issue is not one of compatibility between the claims of heavenly and human authority, but of conflict. During the time at which Mark wrote his gospel, the late days of the Judean revolt, and by the way, the revolt started in 66, ended about 70 with the destruction of the temple. So that's the time period we're talking about. And most modern biblical scholars believe, you don't have to believe them, but they believe that the book of Mark was written around 70 AD or 7 there. During the time at which Mark wrote his gospel, the late days of the Judean revolt, the question of whether or not to pay tribute to Rome was indeed a test that divided Judean nationalists from collaborators with Rome's colonial occupation. Okay, so if you're a collaborator, you can use the Roman coins, right? If you're a Judean nationalist, you wouldn't want to use those coins. You're revolting against that. In fact, there are periods there where the Jews minted their own coins. Be short-lived, but
Well, you'd be considered a traitor if you were using Roman coins when you're fighting against the Romans.
right.
It's kind of like right now in Ukraine, people, piece of paper they're saying, people are starting to speak Ukrainian when they weren't, when they used to speak Russian. I mean, they're fighting the Russians, and they're saying that country's invading. They're abandoning Russian stuff that's been in their culture, language, and things that because of the conflict.
So Russian would be the language of the collaborator, not of the nationalists.
Right. So it's kind of, I mean, that's kind of the way they're viewing it. So I kind of say if you're a Jewish nationalist at the time of Mark's writing, this coin test would be, you know, it might be a life or death question.
Yeah.
Particularly here inside Jerusalem, Romans are all surrounding you. You've got a guy that's doing that. You might say, we don't need you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of infighting going on, I think, within the Jews in Jerusalem.
Now, we have a little bit of a conundrum here, because if Mark is writing 70 AD and Jesus is crucified 32 AD, then what Jesus says is 40 years or so earlier than the open conflict, right? So it says, the author is saying, the image of Caesar alone should have settled the matter, since no true Judean patriot would have used such idolatrous currency. The revolutionary provisional government in Palestine minted its own coins, and the inscription which extolled Caesar as the august and divine son of God would have settled it for Christians, since that is the identity of Jesus. The choice then between the rival authorities of God and Caesar could scarcely be stated more sharply. Now, here's part of the conundrum. In the time of Jesus, is pre this revolt.
But there were people fighting the Romans back then.
Sure.
Like Judas Iscariot. Some people believe that those were part of the, I don't know if you call them Jewish terrorists, but I can't think of what they call them.
Zealots?
Maccabees?
No.
Zealots?
Zealots, yeah.
Zealots,
Zealots,
sorry.
okay.
Those were the people that were actively, more engaged in resistance.
That's been going on for 200 years by the time of Jesus.
Yeah.
Judas Maccabeus was 3rd century. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, the thing, Buy American made, the Jewish people are supposed to use their coins with the Jewish people that have the businesses. And, instead of going to the Roman seller, they would go to the Jewish seller and use the coins there. So.
The other thing is human nature plays into this too, because whether it's Roman coins or whether it's Jewish temple money, money is money, and for a lot of people. And if they have an opportunity to get ahead, probably 80-90% maybe of most people would care how they were paid, as long as they were
paid.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much that had to do with it. Now, as I'm sitting here, I'm wondering, was Judas paid in Roman money, and that's why he threw it out? I don't know. That's purely speculation.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
We're all the factors.
Well, to continue on, and this is not from the book, by Jewish or religious law from Exodus, Every male Jew over the age of 20 must offer an annual contribution to the temple of half a shekel. In the first century, a shekel was equated with the Greek tetradrachm, like a dimension. A silver coin of the weight of approximately 14 grams. Half a shekel would include 7 grams of silver. So this, at the time of Jesus, from everything I can find, they're using the Tyrian shekel. And that's the Tyrian shekel. And look whose face is on it. And they're using that to pay their tithing to the temple. So things may have changed a little bit later, but at least during the time of Jesus, the Tyrian shekel was actually preferred because it had a higher concentration of silver over the tetradrachm. And so the authors say Jesus, who does not himself carry the coin, escapes the trap by challenging his antagonists to reveal their own political allegiance. It is this that provokes their incredulity. Thank you. I know I was going to slaughter that word. Something no neat doctrine of obedient citizenship. I give up. Obedient citizenship would have done. Okay, that's why the authors are claiming that this Roman coin debate, where Jesus looks at the coin, is misunderstood, because they're saying that it's commonly assumed through Christianity that it means we are obedient to the government, to the state, but we're also obedient to God. And that split allegiance is what the authors are saying is somewhat of a problem.
I disagree with the authors.
Okay, that's fine.
He said,
I love it.
He clearly said, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and God what is God's. Why is that not clear?
Well, it could be because the viewpoint that everyone's got.
Yeah.
She's right. It's in the Bible. You pay to God.
I knew Jim would
tax,
like
and
that.
You have
Jim's
to
on
pay
my
to the
side.
government, you pay to God. And that's what the Jewish people were required to do. It's in the Bible. It's the truth. They're just trying to throw monkey wrench into this.
No, not
Okay.
So
Another way of looking at it.
we complicated?
Wasn't this what the money changers were for, though? They changed the coins into the right coins,
Yeah.
and then apparently were cheating the people, and that's why Jesus came out of the temple and died before.
This
Well, I
is
don't know
the
if they were
Jewish
cheating
coin?
the
Yeah.
people.
Which
Well,
is-
that-
This is the shekel.
It's
This
the
is the-
shekel that they accepted.
Yeah.
But that's got the imagery on it too.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's the point.
that's the point.
Oh,
So
I thought there was a Hebrew coin that they used. They said that-
You know, I tried to find an image of the Hebrew coin from the first century, and I can't find it.
Well, what is a Tyrian?
Tyrian,
That sounds like
Tyre.
the city of Tyre.
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
And the reason that the temple liked this coin better, is because it had a higher concentration of silver.
Higher purity.
Yes, the purity was higher.
They were
Than even
paying
the
their Roman
tetragram.
taxes with this money
They were
As
paying,
well as the temple taxes.
Yeah.
temple tax.
and the Roman tax.
Yeah.
well, they would be paying it with, if it were me, I would pay with the tetragram.
Yep.
I'm slaughtering these words today.
Mhm.
And then to the government, and then give the Tyrian shekel to the church, because one has more silver in it than the other.
You want to get more
It would be
silver
my
too.
minor revolt. So,
But the authors think that Jesus was just tricking them
well,
into this
well,
rock and a hard place
I
thing.
think he's saying that our allegiance should be, the authors are saying, is to the heavenly kingdom, to God, and not to, well, let's put on this basis. Back in the 1950s, there were a lot of laws in this country that required Negroes, at that time we call them Negroes, now we call them Black Americans, to use one bathroom and the whites use another one. Okay, that's the government. So,
And they had to pay poll tax if
okay,
they got
and-
that far.
But the point is the government's requiring one thing and our Christian morality is requiring another. So which do you follow? Even today, I
You
think there are
do
probably,
both, and then you have civil disobedience, like
Yeah.
the sitting in Woolworth, like
Yeah.
they did.
Or you have the people that say, well, it's in the Bible that you can have slaves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they did. They did
So
say
their
that.
justification
Yeah.
said, well, we're just doing what.
until Jesus comes along and says, love your brother as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself.
But those were in the Old Testament too. I mean, he was quoting the Old Testament. That was not new, really.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
true. That's
so-
the golden rule.
Well, but he
It's
also
in
says
every
that's the
religion.
greatest commandment.
Yeah. I'm just saying that there were Christians that justified what they were doing using the Bible.
Yeah.
The same as others that use the Bible and say that's wrong.
That is true.
So we're left between a rock and a hard place again.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's when you have this big trouble.
Yeah.
John Lewis calls it.
Yeah.
John Lewis.
Yeah.
that's right. At this point in time, where we have combined our money to say, in God we trust, and have a political figure on it, are we giving back to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's?
I don't know,
Because the
are
money
we?
has them both.
Did we add "In God We Trust" to the coins in the 50s?
Yes.
Because I know that they added "Under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance in the
Mm-hmm.
50s. So
That was
we kind of
because
went
the
back to our
communist
religious.
threat.
That was the
The
communist threat.
godless communists, so we decided we would distinguish between that.
That's the whole McCarthyism.
Well, and it's also, the 50s is the height of the racial wars.
Yeah.
And the struggle over segregation and desegregation. So, but in God we trust.
And they're trying to take that off of the coins now.
Well, here's another one for you.
There's a movement that wants to take it off.
The authors say Jesus is presented not as a savior. I need my British friend to come
Where's
in
your
and read
British
this
guy?
for me.
Yeah.
Jesus is presented not as a sage who explains life's mysteries, but as the great interrogator of public and private arrangements of privilege and power. His queries lay bare the inner conflicts of disciplines, or disciples and opponents alike. You buy that? He's the great interrogator as opposed to great sage.
And he does ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think in general, I would agree with that.
Yeah,
In this
I was
particular
just going
instance,
to
I don't.
dismiss this sage advice. He's trying to get people to confront their own conflicts within themselves.
I think we would have problems in our country if we agreed with these authors, quite frankly. There's a lot of Christians that would say, well, I don't need to pay my taxes. I was like,
There's a lot of them that do say
let's
that.
go ahead and interpret it.
Yeah.
Well, they don't get away with it.
Yeah.
Some of them get away with running their temporary tags for a year or two because they don't want to pay their taxes.
Oh, yeah.
Or
I've
no
seen that.
tag.
Yeah.
Well, this is saying Mark, because when you say, I would think Matthew, it would seem to me just him present Jesus as the Savior. I think of the Sermon on the Mount, or all the. Of course, Mark has parable too. Jesus does teach, so.
I have a book on my shelf that talks about the 4 Gospels and the 4 authors, and it claims that Mark is the rebel.
Yeah.
It certainly sounds like it now. I mean, I never really noticed it before. I mean, but every single story that in this book is about Jesus talking about poverty and rich and trying to, pound it into them that they need to figure out God's kingdom's rules, not their kingdom's rules. Credulity is not a virtue.
Yes. Define credulity, it's to believe too easily. And pedagogical strategies to break the spell of credulity that the social order casts over its subjects, and so to force a crisis of faith. In other words, there are certain norms the society puts on us. And the authors are saying Jesus' role was to break that easy belief in those norms and force us to engage in reader, disciple, disturbing and disrupting quandary. So I'm moving right along because I have a video I want to show you. Might this suggest that the church's own theological discourse should be less declarative and more interrogative? So what's declarative? Making a statement. Yeah. Interrogatory is asking questions, right? As our lawyer has already told us.
Your legal side first.
Doubt about the world.
You do all the interrogatories.
The authors go on to say, doubt about the world is a necessary condition for joining the struggle to transform it. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so you're all transformers and you're all doubters.
Skeptic. I doubt, therefore
I gave you a good intro for that one, didn't I? Well, after the chapters, the word in our world, and it talks about Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire. He's a Brazilian educator, and he believed in two fundamental approaches to education. And those are the banking method, which basically assumes that the teacher has all the essential information. The student is an empty vessel waiting to be filled with knowledge. Elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other option is, sometimes, is
the professors, the sage on the stage.
Yep.
The sage on the stage.
And now they talk about them being the sage beside the stage. The second alternative is the framework for thinking. The teacher fosters creative and active engagement on questions related to real life experience. So trying to make it real life.
Some places don't they call that the Socratic method?
Yeah.
Yes.
In medicine.
Right. Students actively engage in the process of learning. Teacher also learns by raising questions like who, what, why, and how. So you believe a teacher will learn too?
Yes.
Paul,
What was the question?
does the teacher learn too in the process?
Yes, always.
And Jane, does the teacher also learn?
Not in the law, no. Socratic method in the law is like he's already got the answer, and you better say exactly what he thinks.
Okay.
Word for word.
In the scientific realm, the questions are lifted up as being more important than the
Yeah.
answers.
It's not
And
legal.
what you always hope you get from an experiment is not only the answer to the experiment, but the next question.
Next question. I can see that
Another
better in medicine.
example is math. Okay. So you can't ask the student about, well, is this right or that right? You know, for instance, algebra. There is a method that has to be taught. And I just wish that my algebra teacher when I was in high school would have broken it down and explained it instead of getting him off the subject talking about working as in the war plant during World War II. And anyway, when a math teacher teaches math or geometry, it's the empty head method. You have to teach the technique and the structure and the method. Okay, so both methods are necessary in education.
Yeah, I was going to say Freire basically does believe that even math, you can ask the student, how would you solve this? Rather than saying, this is how you solve it. Because it's the question that leads to it. And Nadine, you wanted to say something. You said a yes earlier. You want to chime in?
Well, I heard you guys talking about the sage on the stage. The other is guide on the side, where you do just that. You kind of let them do some exploration to kind of get the concept. I have to say, I learn from my students every year things that I think I might know, and then they bring in a different point of view and add to the discussion.
Well, does education kind of evolve? I mean, or should it evolve like in the early stages when you're young? It's more the banking method they call it, and then as you get older, it evolves to be more the
Isn't that kind of the basis of the new core method of math, that they're trying to teach the kids to look at all the pieces of it more thoroughly rather than just looking for the answer at the end?
The problem is the older methods led to attempts to simply memorize what the instructor had said.
Right.
Nobody learned anything because memorization is very difficult for humans. Now they've actually got what they call the flipped classroom. It's this interrogatory method, and the students are supposed to come prepared, having already read the material, and then the instructor, as Nadine said, the guide on the side or whatever, is there to further illuminate and create discussion.
But you do have, like Jim said, you actually do need both. I don't think it's,
Yes, you do need both.
I don't think it's an evolution. I think it's a balance.
Yeah.
You've got to have some basic rules of science or math or the law, and then ask the questions from there.
Well, everybody has to be taught how to read. That's how you prepare before you come to
And you have to
class.
have a basis for your discussion. 2 + 2 does not equal 5. So, it would be a really stupid argument.
Right. Okay.
Just using math as the example.
When I was in medical school, they used the banking method. And one of my professors said, 50% of what we're teaching you now is wrong, and it's up to you to figure out which 50% that is.
Oh, no.
Oh,
That's scary. Exactly.
The problem was nobody knew back then.
I guess that's honesty, though.
But they didn't like it when I asked questions. When I was a student, they'd have an older student so a mentor, and I'd ask questions. I had about 6 different mentors then, because each one said, I can't answer that, and someone else said. I finally gave up asking questions.
Oh.
Well, moving right along, Ferrari says a good teacher helps students learn how to ask the right question rather than giving them answers. And
That's critical thinking.
it takes a combination of both methods, because you have to understand what 1 is and what 2 is and what 3 is before you can get creative. Literacy, this portion after the chapter, the authors say literacy is more than the ability to read and write. It's the ability to interpret the world and bring critical questions to bear on the social context of one's life. Questioning may be the most basic tool we need for the discipleship task of social transformation. And rather than having you disagree or agree, I want to move along because I've got a video that's going to take most of the rest of the time. And I think that the authors say that the most famous example of turning the question around, which is the kind of the gist of the chapter, comes from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. And I've read it years ago, and I listened to the whole thing. It's about 55 minutes long. You're not going to hear it all. So this is what I've done is I've taken excerpts from that, and it basically the setting is that the clergy were publicly urging the local blacks not to engage in these sit-downs at lunch counters and that sort of thing, calling it unwise and untimely. And they went on to invoke their own religious authority against civil disobedience. So here's the video.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement calling my present activities unwise and untimely. I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century B.C. left their villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with a superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it is an historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern. Since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954, outlawing segregation in the public schools, at first glance it may seem rather paradoxical for us consciously to break laws. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. Let me take note of my other major...
I'm going to stop it up there because we're running out of time, and there's so much more. And I thought it was interesting that he talks about the white moderate. And if you have a chance, go search for a letter from the Birmingham jail on YouTube, and you can hear the whole thing. And it's a good challenge for us. The authors say, it is our responsibility as citizens of democracy to question authority to probe with our questions the discrepancy between rhetoric and reality, between stated values and practice. Every political organization knows the power of defining the questions and framing the public debate. Those in power do not like to be questioned, it goes on, and at the end of this chapter, they pose a whole bunch of questions about why are more and more women and children living in poverty? Why are only rich people able to get elected to public office? Why is there an increase in domestic poverty? Why is the United States facing financial difficulties, our big deficit, and yet we continue to spend on military? And it goes on even to say, why do so many churches simply mirror the dominant culture? Why is it that the overriding agenda of institutional churches appears to be self-preservation? And how do we justify the tremendous investment portfolios of religious institutions? So here's the chapter challenge I want to end with. Just as Jesus questions the world, so does he question us. Perhaps because we have eyes that do not see and ears that do not hear, his questions open up painful and awkward uncertainties. In Mark's gospel, we encounter a Jesus who is portrayed not as the answer to our questions, but as the question to our answers. And so for next week, the exciting, innovative, creative, revising the song of the vineyard with Paul Bennetts.
And it's communion.
So thank you very much, and I'm sorry we had to rush it. There's more discussion I would have liked to have had. Have a good service this morning.
Thank you.
Well, those
Thank you,
questions
Jonathan.
really have a place in today's political
Yeah.
agenda.
Well, that's very true.
Throughout history, I think they have a place.
Yes.
I Googled what jurist was he talking about? Is he just talking about jurists in general? Or
I'm trying to remember.
I thought he was talking about a judge.
I think it is. I think it was a Supreme Court judge. I can't remember.
I looked it up. Google doesn't know.
Oh, okay. Well, Google doesn't know everything.
Google doesn't know, nobody knows.
That's
See,
right.
The problem is you have to
If
know,
Google and Wikipedia don't know, then I am lost.
Jane, you have to know how to frame the question.
Yes, that is a good point.
Well, sometimes that's true on Google.
Oh, it absolutely is true.
You ask a question that goes
I'm
off this
good
way.
at
and you
Google
ask another
because
way.
of Westlaw.
Yeah.
You know, we had to learn how to research it with saying the right words.
Right.